Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming to the breakout session. This one is titled How the Private Sector and Major Institutions Are Meeting the Moment. So the morning was fabulous with NSA and Lisa Garza and Kat, and they talked about the movement building. And now we're going to see how the corporations and large institutions are responding to the moment. So I will be facilitating. I'm Debra Gore-Mann, the CEO of the Greenlining Institute, and we've brought 3 large corporations together for you. We're hoping that these institutional employers will be able to address the thousands of people that they employ, and the significant investments that they make in the communities, both nationally and globally. And we'll have a conversation about how this inside-outside advocacy and movement building is affecting their jobs in the workplace. So let me bring up Kleber Santos. He is the Senior Executive Vice President and Head of Diverse Segments, Representation, and Inclusion of Wells Fargo, responsible for leading efforts to make the company a place where diversity is reflected at all levels in every facet of the company's operations, process, and programs. Okay, Kleber, that's a lot. Welcome to the Greenlining Summit.
Thank you. Thanks so much for inviting me. Much appreciated. It's an honor to be here.
Yes. Now, I know you're fairly new in the position, but why don't you just give us a little bit about what you do?
Will do, certainly. And just before I go there, real briefly, once again, thanks so much for having me. And thanks for all of you that are participating, doing that in the middle of a pandemic when we are trying to juggle like all sorts of different commitments. And in that spirit, my heart goes out to anybody that has been like deeply impacted by COVID. Like I've obviously have family members and friends that have been really negatively impacted by it, and I walk into this conversation with a sobering reminder that we are still experiencing a lot of pain. Also, and on a more lighter note, I have 3 kids and 2 dogs, and so the household here, the Santos household, can get pretty noisy. I'm going to try to manage that as best as I can. My dogs have a big problem with Amazon trucks. So sometimes when you see like Amazon delivery trucks, my dog will be working. So I'll try my best. What I do at Wells Fargo is quite an interesting model that I think is relatively new, at least in financial services. But I believe that is a model that will almost inevitably be replicated in the future. So instead of having diversity initiatives that are diffused across the organization, our CEO, like Charlie, decided to centralize and elevate all of that. So my team is responsible for like 3 areas. The first one is diversity, equity, and inclusion for our associates. We have about 270,000 associates globally. Vast majority, about 250,000, are in the US. So all of the diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives is under my team's responsibility. Also, supplier diversity, like Wells Fargo has been increasingly making progress in supplier diversity, and that's under the responsibilities of my team. And then lastly, how do we deeply understand, develop products and services, and eventually grow the number of underrepresented customers in each one of our business lines? So across all of Wells Fargo's business lines, there is that business imperative on expanding diverse customers, and that's also under my purview.
Excellent. So we heard earlier this morning about how the movement building around voter suppression is really affecting the corporate environment, and how corporations are supporting or otherwise engaging in some of these political activism. Can you speak a little bit about your role and how Wells Fargo responds to these outside movements internally?
Yes, and speaking candidly, I have mixed feelings about this growing, the increasing involvement on corporations on political issues. And on one hand, I watch the overall polarization of our political landscape as a citizen, as an American. I watch that polarization with a lot of disappointment and fear and concern. And I think sometimes companies get dragged into that political landscape with social media and etc. And in some cases can distract the company from what they should be doing, which is focusing on the customers and helping our associates and participating in the economy. So there's a part of me that, as a citizen, not as an employee of Wells Fargo, I wish that our political environment was a lot more focused on dialogue and compromise and coming together, which would prevent the need for corporations to get involved. On the other hand, there are a lot of issues that transcend business issues, like they are moral imperatives, and in some cases they are cornerstones of our democracy. And in those instances, Wells Fargo and increasingly other companies as well, we feel like we have a responsibility to add our voice to the dialogue. So a few examples: voting suppression or any type
Yeah.
of legislation that can restrict voting rights. We believe that voting rights is a cornerstone of democracy and that voting should be made easier, not harder. And any attempt to make voting harder for specific subpopulations is something that we don't support. And we have been vocal about that. The violence against the Asian American Pacific Islander community, it's preposterous, it's absurd, and it's something that we believe that must stop, and we have a responsibility to speak on those issues. Frankly, it is the expectation of our customers, it is
Okay.
certainly the expectations of our associates that we need to speak on those moral imperatives, not getting involved on all of the issues, not taking a political stance, which is not really what we try to do, but to speak selectively on issues that we believe are foundational to the well functioning and health of our society.
Yeah, I appreciate that perspective, Kleber, and I think the disconnect and the gap happens when companies and corporations also invest in politics, right? That we see PACs or we see supporting political candidates, and I think that's why, in America, where we have allowed corporations, basically to have a vote, I think that's where it merges. And so it's hard to have this separation. As long as companies and corporations and big institutions can have influence, then I think it moves both ways. But I appreciate the idea that there are just some things that are just foundational to who we are as a country, right? The right to vote, the right to safety. And it's interesting to hear that you all do weigh in when it's appropriate or where you think that opportunity exists. Perhaps we can shift a bit to community-based investments. So Greenlining has been working with Wells Fargo for 40 plus years, frankly, and under the Community Reinvestment Act and how we can invest and build community together. Can you speak to how, from your vantage point in the organization, you invest in communities of color and otherwise those who are less advantaged?
Yes, and I always preface this by saying, Debbie, that I think Wells Fargo is doing quite a bit, but we recognize that we need to do a lot more, and that frankly, progress in reducing the racial wealth gap, and it goes beyond only the racial wealth gap. I mean, there are issues in society that we do believe we have a responsibility to acknowledge and to try to make progress on. Issues around like women-owned small businesses, tend to have more difficulty thriving as sometimes their men-owned counterparts do. Issues with the LGBTQ community and like military veterans is one issue that I believe society still has a lot of work to do to treat our veterans. They're frankly trying to protect our way of life and our freedoms. And how do we reinsert them into society in a way that they can also fully participate into our economy? So there are a lot of issues that we believe that we need to do some work on, and we recognize that we need to do more, and that it takes time for the impact to be felt. Specifically on your question around underserved communities, I think a few things that we have been doing that are encouraging. They are good next steps. in no particular order, we have announced investments in about 11 MGIs. Like those of you that don't know all of the acronyms in financial services,
Yeah.
MGIs are minority depository institutions. So those are relatively small banks that have to be majority owned by a person of color. All 11 that we have invested are Black MGIs. So they are majority owned and managed by Black executives and owners. And
Yes.
the point is to make capital investments. So there's no interest. They don't need to pay us back anytime soon. Is to make like a capital allocation investment and then bring our expertise to bear and frankly our distribution scale, allowing them to have access to their customers to access our ATMs and supporting them in a variety of ways. I think that is a very, very important thing because a lot of those communities, like that MGI, is a cornerstone on how commerce and financial services takes place in that community. So
Okay.
instead of Wells Fargo trying to do everything, us going into those communities and helping those institutions is really important. I'll cite one last one just for the sake of time here, which is the
Yeah.
open for fund business. That we, unlike the majority of banks, we have made a decision in the first round of PPP, the government program, that all of the proceeds from Wells Fargo we are going to use to help small business owners. So it's about a $400 million fund that is primarily geared towards helping small businesses, most of which are minority owned or women owned.
Yes. Yes. And we have about a minute here, and I see in the chat, it's sort of a compilation here. What are the top challenges that you are seeing at Wells Fargo for advancing an equity agenda? We've heard a lot this morning about the challenges that communities are facing, boots on the ground, but from the institution, especially a financial institution where so much of America is built on capitalism. What are the major challenges that you see in advancing equity? Because there's a real feeling that we don't want to go back to the old ways. We want to see a new way of investing in communities and building economic power together. So what are some of those challenges for you, Kleber?
I'll be brief there because for that, gosh,
Yeah.
I can cite probably 5 big ones, but like
Okay.
if I had to pick the biggest one, I think is awareness by a lot of people on the realities of underrepresented groups. The vast majority of executives, managers, and associates that I have encountered within Wells Fargo and outside of Wells Fargo, they are very good people. They want to be a part of the solution. They want to do the right thing. But many times they don't fully appreciate how pervasive the problems are.
Yes.
And unless you are able to walk in the shoes of a Latinx, of an African American, of a woman, of a member of the LGBTQ community, and you understand deeply everything that they face, it is hard for you to be motivated to answer those issues with a sense of urgency. So a lot of my work has been in bringing people together, educating them. And once they get educated on the issues, I have seen that they can move very quickly into supporting the solutions. So it's more, how do we educate at large scale corporate America?
Yeah. Oh, I appreciate that. And you know that we are going to keep putting the external pressures to help educate and make awareness. So thank you so much, Kleber, for joining us and the sponsorship of Wells Fargo and letting us have a voice, because you all, do let us speak freely and let us do the work for the community. So thank you again for joining.
Thank you. You do awesome work. Thank you so much for giving me the chance. Thanks, folks.
Thanks. And now, everyone, I would like to bring Angela Jenkins from Kaiser Permanentes. So Angela has been at Kaiser for nearly 20 years, both in the East Bay service area and Northern California regional offices. Anybody who knows anything about the Bay Area and doing this work knows Angela. Let me just say that. She is currently the Senior Director of Community Health for Kaiser Permanentes Northern California region. Okay, leading a portfolios of initiatives. If I get something wrong here, actually, you can correct me. Addressing equity, social justice, healthy school climate, mental health and trauma, community and family safety, homelessness prevention, and health and nutrition. How's that?
Perfect.
Okay. So I wanted to start, and maybe we can frame for those who have joined us, you know, the critical work and actually the founding research that Kaiser Permanente did on ACEs, and how that has related now to the social determinants of health. Can you just sort of launch us, because you've seen this work evolved and now it's become a very common nomenclature. Can you just help sort of ground us in Kaiser and how that work has really now, I think, shaped some of the racial equity and economic equity conversations we're having?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. And yes, Dr. Vince Folletti started that research at Kaiser Permanente. And I have to say, with my intro, while I lead that portfolio of programs, I don't do that alone. I have
right
great colleagues who are working with me at the national and regional level that weigh in, and experts that help inform the way we do that work. So I'm going to do a shout out to all of them if they're on the call, and thank them for our successes. But yes, Kaiser from our clinician side was really early on in identifying ACEs and trauma in a particular segment of our community, which was not diverse at that point. It was really older women, primarily white women, that we did that study on. And over the years, as we've done our community health work, and as our community health work has evolved, and as we look at the root causes of what influences individual health over time, whether it's social determinants of health or transportation or housing, over the past years, and particularly last year, we all got a great lesson in how trauma and ACEs impact communities of color.
And so, remind us what ACEs stands for.
Adverse childhood experiences.
Adverse childhood, yeah. Adverse childhood experiences that translate into health outcomes and how you live your life.
Yes, and it's really what happens early on in someone's life, the trauma, the experiences that they have, where they're living, whether there's abuse or violence in the home, whether or not they've had an unstable life growing up. The more traumatic experiences you have, the deeper and greater your poor health outcomes can be later on in life. And we've done a great deal of work around that. We've partnered with the Center for Youth Wellness, and we've partnered with other organizations, Rise Youth Center, Youth Alive, another organization that really focuses on trauma, to really figure out what can we do early on in someone's life to mitigate those impacts later on, because we know that has an impact on health. And I think a number of the social determinants of health, when you look at school climate and having a safe school climate, that's really important.
Yes.
We've begun to launch our Thriving Schools initiative. You also look at housing, and I think housing leads to a number of health issues, but when you're young and unstably housed, that also impacts your health. And so last year, I think we facilitated an opportunity to focus on looking at racial justice and social justice nationally around systemic racism and trauma, and how that impacts communities. And we actually are investing in a number of organizations nationally, partnering with Policy Link as one of our lead organizations, to help us really think about how to focus on racial justice and trauma in communities. And not only we're funding a cohort of organizations nationally to do that work, but we're also asking them to work with us to say, how can we look inside Kaiser Permanente to think about how we can show up differently, how we can do our work differently, whether it's through our investment practices, our impact investment strategies, how we partner with community, how we make our grants and investments in community. So we really are trying to create a learning collaborative around all of that in partnership with individuals. So one, we can provide resources to community-based organizations, but also share that learning back in our organization. And we're just sort of at the beginning part of that journey with Policy Link and others. It's very exciting. We're learning a lot. It's a great opportunity. And so that's how we're beginning to think about looking at ACEs and trauma, not only in our investments and how we do our work, but how we show up as an organization in the community.
Yes, I see that, you know, living in Northern California, I definitely see how Kaiser has this concerted messaging campaign. Yes. Can you, so when we started COVID-19 and there wasn't really this understanding, you know, the disparate impact of communities of color, and then that understanding came, and now we're moving into vaccinations, and how there's a segment of our population who's sort of not on board, let's say that. How do you all then develop those messaging campaigns, both, you know, from your large institutional perch, as well as these direct client services. Can you just speak to us to how you're meeting that moment?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I have to say, we did it again in partnership with community early on in the pandemic when we were hearing about the disproportionate impact on African American communities in the beginning, and then Latino community, Latinx communities moving on, and then API communities moving on. The virus impacted people differently as it unfolded, right? So,
That's right.
so I would say probably around June of last year, we began conversations with community partners to think about how do we leverage trusted messengers at a community level to get to focus on prevention at that point, because the vaccine was not around at that time. Really trying to figure out what we could do to get the message to individuals from people that they trusted, to create awareness in communities around prevention of COVID-19. And so what we did was we launched an outreach campaign, a CBO outreach campaign, in partnership with the East Bay Community Foundation, Public Goods Project, and other community-based organizations. And we provided support to over 25 organizations to launch trusted messenger campaigns in the community. And that the entire campaign included the CBO outreach. And it also included some public service announcements called Love Protects. That was the theme of it. Showing love, wearing a mask, protecting others is making sure you're using the preventative behaviors yourself. So we had some public announcements go out. And then we also worked with Public Goods Project to launch an influencer campaign. So leveraging micro influencers in the community to get messages out. And we reached over 200 influencers in the community. And it was really successful. And what we ended up doing was expanding that effort in 2021. And many of our partners, like the Latino Community Foundation, was way ahead of us in terms of really focusing on the vaccine at that point. And so we actually have leveraged their work and other work of great organizations nationally to launch a second effort around vaccine hesitancy and vaccine confidence. And that is underway. It's launched earlier this year and it is continuing. And then at a national level, we've worked with the Ad Council and the COVID Collaborative to do the same at a national level. And internally, leveraging our own expertise, we developed a vaccine equity playbook to talk about how can you really that people are getting access to the vaccine. What can we do as a system to ensure that people are getting access to the vaccine? And so we've expanded efforts in Northern California, focusing on working with our community clinics and public hospitals, providing a large investment to those institutions to increase access to the vaccine, helping them with operations and support, working with our partners, leveraging our clinical expertise to help inform some of the work that's happening. And I'm proud to say that in Northern California, we're going to make a large investment in some community-based organizations around vaccine access and mobile pop-ups, because we recognize that most of the people now who've wanted to get the vaccine have gotten the vaccine. We're going into younger populations, have some holdouts. So
next level. In
addressing the needs of communities as it unfolds. And so wanting to get resources out in the community so we can meet communities where they're at and make sure that people get the information they need and get the vaccine.
Okay, Angela, questions are just flowing in here. Can we just try to get through? Let's see, we've got about 4 or 5 minutes here. So here's a question. As a national organization, how do you balance having a cohesive organizational strategy and being responsive to the local needs and strengths, right? So it's that national, local.
Yeah, I think it's a conversation many of us at Kaiser Permanentes are having every single day.
Every day.
Because yes, our community health work has moved nationally. We've really enhanced our national presence around community health. We always had one, but it's getting stronger at a national level. And sometimes that can be, you can be concerned about, do you lead what's happening at a hyper local level, right? And so we still have boots on the ground, so to speak, through our incredible community benefit managers that serve our hospitals, who we rely on to inform us about what's really happening at the ground level, that we need to fold into what might be happening and what we might be doing at a national level. So the beauty of Kaiser Permanente is, while we have a national presence, we also have a regional presence and we have a very local presence. And so my job and my colleagues' job at the regional level is to ensure that local voice is being heard at a national level when we implement our national initiatives. And so that's where we're in conversation every day about that. And it's very dynamic conversations to make sure that voice is still being heard and how we make our investments. And so as a program, that's how we do our best to balance all of that.
Well, at Greenlining, we are at the intersection of both the economic equity, the environmental equity, and then all the health. So that's that social determinants of health mashup.
Absolutely.
Can you speak, because so much of the environmental, like here in Northern California, we literally had red skies and people could not go outdoors because the air quality was so poor. Can you bring a little bit of a perspective on the environmental or the climate change and how Kaiser approaches that from an equity lens?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think where we show up with the environmental justice piece of it is one through our voice, of course, but we really focus on how are we showing up as an organization and institution around environmental stewardship. And so 5 years ago, we launched a pledge about environmental stewardship efforts that by 2025 we would have certain things in place. And so it's one, becoming carbon net positive and trying to execute initiatives around that. One is really around being procuring food locally, and I think our supplier diversity program and some of the other work that we're doing is really doing what we can do locally, particularly around food, because we know the supply chain for food is large and it comes from all over and internationally, nationally. So how can we mitigate the environmental impacts around with food? And we're doing that. We're focusing on our recycling practices and making sure that we're looking at non-hazardous waste. Water usage, how are we producing and purchasing products that are environmentally safe, and so having an environmental standard around that, and looking at what ways that we can pursue collaborations nationally to leverage our voice around environmental justice. And so we're taking it not necessarily just from a community health perspective, but how are we showing up as a business in the community to lead the way to do things in an environmentally safe way. So that's how we're approaching that work as an organization.
Gotcha. So actually walking the talk, what are we doing in-house, and then see how it impacts the rest of the climate change. So let me just ask you one last question.
Sure.
That it came, really from the morning sessions where we had community activists who've been doing decades of work here, talking about that there's, that we don't want to go back, that we want to see a new community. Just what is Kaiser Permanentes' perspective on this? Do you feel like there's a pull to go back to normal? I mean, especially things like digital, before I couldn't it was difficult to have a doctor's appointment online, and now boom, it's open. But then now that's showing, broadband access and the racial disparity there. Do you think we are in a moment or you think there's a bit going back?
I think the moment is so fluid. I don't think we can go back. I mean, I think, as a society, I don't think we can go back. I think we learned way too much last year from a racial justice lens, from the school, what's happening in the schools in terms of access to healthcare, and what that showed us last year in terms of what was happening and what systems need to do made differently to ensure that people have good access to care, have good access to quality education. The digital divide is huge. And I think Kaiser Permanente is still, thinking about how to, what do we do in that arena? From our own member perspective, the amount of telehealth and telemedicine that we delivered increased. And I think as a system, like other systems, we realize that when we need to pivot, we can pivot pretty quickly to meet the need. But we also know that there are disparities in the new approach in terms of who wants to access and can access telemedicine or telehealth. It works for some populations and not others. So I think we're in a moment of learning whereby we know we can't go back to where we were. I don't think we want to necessarily. We know we need to move forward, but we have to move forward with an equity lens and make sure that we don't continue to leave people behind. And so I think those are conversations that we are having internally and with our partners. How do we do that in the best way? And I think like everyone else, we're still trying to figure that out. And we need to hear back from people, we need to understand what's happening in the community so we don't repeat history. And so that's like everyone else, we're sort of sitting in it in the moment right now to try to figure out what's the best way to move forward so we don't repeat history.
Excellent. And I would just say amen to centering that equity in all we do. And I'm going to use love protects Love protects. Love protects, Angela. Thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate your time and the work that Kaiser Permanente is doing. And I think, yes, we see you as a healthcare provider, but the investments that you all make, the dedicated resources to support your local community is really valued. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Well, that's two very distinct industries, right? We just had the finance industry and then the healthcare. Well, now I'd like to bring the energy sector to the table. So Jill Anderson is the Senior Vice President of Customer Service at Southern California Edison, SCE, one of the nation's largest electric utilities. She's responsible for overseeing the company's customer products and services, business and residential customer account management, call center operations, customer information replatforming, and competitive telecoms business. So welcome, Jill, to the stage. That's quite a job you have there. Maybe you can put in laywoman's terms what your wide breadth of responsibilities are.
Absolutely. I think it's pretty simple. Southern California Edison, we serve 15 million people in Southern California, one of the most diverse communities in the country. And my job and the job of my team is to make sure that we're meeting the needs of those customers. So we're on the front line, interacting with them, helping them make clean energy choices, helping them manage their energy use so it's affordable. Those are really the top priorities for us.
Okay, so very, very close. Well, you may not know this about Greenlining, and those of you who are listening in and participating. So we were very much founded in the ratepayer movement way back 30, 40 years ago, and how we literally are the advocates for Lifeline and some of the services that make sure that low income and disadvantaged communities have access to utilities. So we've been in partnership with you all and the other California utilities for a long time. Can you talk about the approach that you have to the DEI work and the supplier diversity investments that you all do at SCE?
When I think about that, one thing that's very clear, and certainly has been even made more clear recently, but diversity for our business, it isn't something that's just nice to do. It's something that's absolutely critical for the success of us as a company and the success of our customers. Okay. I've got a good example, I think. So last fall, we experienced one of the most destructive fires in California history, the Creek Fire. And that occurred up in the Sierra Nevada mountains in this area that we supply the power and also generate power with hydro. And we experienced some pretty extreme destruction from the fire. And we had to scramble because it was September and we need to make a lot of restoration and rebuild in that area before the winter and the snow came. And we had to reach into our supplier network. We had some challenges at first because we couldn't find the right partner to be able to build a temporary work site for over 1,000 employees to be basically yes. and working in this remote area. And one of our suppliers who we built a relationship with, they're AAA Mobile Solutions. They're an LGBTQ certified diverse supplier, and they came through for us and really helped us be successful under incredible circumstances. And so I think that's part of the story that we have with diversity in our business, both on the supplier side and on the team side. The solutions here are ones that are helping us and all of the people we serve be more successful. And we're really proud that 40% of our total spend is done today with diverse suppliers.
Yes, and Greenlining actually produces a supplier diversity report card that helps, articulate where the growth is and where the opportunity is. And we are so grateful that you all actively participate with us in that and that community learning and listening. So we're with you on that supplier diversity engagement. So we just had Earth Day, yes. And so much of the utilities, right, are linked to what's happening with the earth and like understanding that relationship that is so symbiotic for a utility company and how you all deal with climate change. Can you just speak broadly about your approach as it relates to climate equity as they're all coming together that your energy is related to your climate, is related to your health. Just speak to us about how you all are approaching that.
That's I could talk about that all day. I mean, that's something
great.
Forward to the strategy at SCE. We have put forward a vision for what the future needs to look like, and it's not just of the electric sector, but of the whole economy in order to achieve our really critical carbon reduction goals. And that's a vision that is providing affordable, clean energy for all customers, not just the customers that today can afford solar or an electric vehicle. And so we spend tens of millions of dollars every year on programs, clean energy programs that are targeted with the communities that are traditionally underserved. I mean, we can look at, solar rooftop, for example, and right now we know that it's still necessary for additional incentives in order to reach affordable housing. And we've got a great example here too, where we have a partnership with a company called Grid Alternatives. And their role, as you're familiar, is help our customers get access to these incredible incentives. They put rooftop solar on customers' homes that wouldn't otherwise be able to afford it. And they partner with local job training, and the people installing the solar are also people who are benefiting because they're getting new skills to be able to transition into a clean energy workforce of the future. And I've actually myself been on a number of these builds, and you get to go right up on the roof and learn a little bit about how the solar is connected. And I speak to the homeowners, and the impact that we're making on individuals is significant. Electric costs for some of our customers is a very big concern. So programs like that we do with Greenlining, we do it with electric vehicles. We're providing incentives not just for someone who can buy a brand new car, but also someone who's buying a used electric vehicle. You can get an incentive from SCE if you're a customer of ours for buying a pre-owned EV. We really want to make sure that this transition, which is going to require a lot of investment in new technology, is something that's really benefiting everybody.
Yeah, Jill, and I think people are just actually happy to hear that you all are talking about transition, right? That there may be a perception that utility companies just want to do the same old thing. And in fact, y'all have been in conversation about what is transitioning to clean energy, what is transitioning if you center racial equity and equity, what does that really mean? And so I think it's just good for people to know that you all are having that vision, and that there's a different narrative that can be spoken and engaged with the communities. So, we, as was shared on the previous two panelists, there's a unique impact happening on communities of color in particular, and I welcome your perspective on this, the idea of utility debt. And I should have brought it up on medical debt as well. So it's not like your industry is alone, and then there's renters debt, and then there's mortgage debt. So there's accumulation of, the lowest, those who are in need are being hit the hardest. Can you just give us a perspective on how you all approach, the idea of the pandemic having created these really disruptive economic business decisions? And like you say, you service so many customers in the state. How you all, balance all of that and work for the community?
Well, we need our product to be affordable so that people will want to use it. And we need to help people who today are in, an average customer who is behind on their bill today is more than twice as much in debt now than they would have been pre-COVID. And so we reacted, as soon as we saw COVID coming, we reacted in a number of ways to try to help our customers. The first thing is we have stopped doing any disconnections for residential and small business customers. And that's still in place today, and we're 14 months later. So we're continuing to put a hold on disconnections while we know that people need time as the economy reopens to get back on their feet. We also implemented new bill forgiveness programs. So if customers who qualify pay their next bill and the bills after that on time, we will forgive the old bills that they didn't pay. And so that's a program called the Arrearage Management Program. And if you're in it for a whole year, you can get up to $8,000 of debt forgiven. And that's something that we just launched in February, and we already have more than 9,000 customers enrolled. And I've heard from customers directly who feel this incredible sense of relief. And they know, if I could just stay current, I don't have to dig out of this hole. So that's a really important component. We did other things. We suspended late payment fees so that it's not making it worse for customers. We have expanded access for customers to discount programs, which, Debbie, I know you're very familiar with, our care programs and others that help customers get a discount. I think we know people are struggling, and our number one focus is to help them stay current with their bills and make sure that, that our product that they depend on is something that's affordable for them.
And we have just a couple more minutes. So I just wanted to ask you, that this morning we heard that the movement building is putting pressure on corporations to take a political position, to be quite honest, on voter suppression, on anti-violence against Asian American community, AAPI in general. Are you all feeling that political pressure to take a corporate stand or make a corporate statement as well?
Well, one thing that I'm really proud of with Edison is how much we're guided by our corporate values. And when we have an experience, our employees experience, but we see things going on in the world that are in contrast with those values, our senior leadership has no hesitation speaking out and stating where we stand and what is or is not aligned with our values. And if you look just in the past 12 months on any number of major issues that have been on the minds of our employees, on the minds of our customers, we are taking a stand. But I also think that it's important to do more than take a stand, right? And one thing that I heard from team members, especially last summer when we were all very much impacted by all the civil and racial unrest, is that your words alone are meaningless without action. We have to do something. We can't just have like a great crafted quote for social media, but we actually have to do something that lasts beyond the news cycle. And so that's something where SCE just in August last year released a significant amount of pay equality data out publicly to a level I don't think any of our peers in S&P 500 have shared in the past. So we really want to push people.
That's true.
Be transparent, even if you have gaps you need to fill, and we do. But we're very proud of the progress that we've made so far, and we want to be transparent about where we still need to do work, and we think if everyone can do that, we can move so much faster. And we have to keep listening, right? Hearing from what our employees are saying and what matters to them. Yeah.
In our last minute here, I do want to pull something from the chat, at least because we do have folks engaged here, and it's around around restorative practices. And so the question is, what kind of restorative practices is Edison taking into account as it's related to this, carbon-related harm? Just sort of the idea of restorative practices.
So, I think there's a number of examples. If you look at, like I mentioned, the hydro plants that we operate in several areas in the state. As part of that, we operate, various environmental preserves and maintaining or restoring the environment back to what it looked like before civilization came in and changed the landscape. That's common in parts of our licenses and the activities that we do in the areas where we're still a generator. We also have done things, out on Catalina Island where we're an operator as well. We're a partner with the Catalina Island Conservancy to help make sure that, more than 80% of that island stays in its natural state. So we really see ourselves as a partner in the community, but in the environment. And we need to make sure that, to the point, the person who asked the question, we can restore where things had been disturbed, but also we have to think about it going forward because there's going to be new build, new solar and new wind and new energy storage, and all of that has to be done really in harmony, if you would, with the environment that we're working in.
Yes, wonderful. So thank you. We've run out of time, but we appreciate your perspective and the work you're doing in partnership with community. We just ask that you stay at the table with us and that we create, this new America that we are seeking to create, this equity that allows everybody to be prosperous and healthy and live healthy lives. So thank you, Jill Anderson. We appreciate you. All right, everybody. Thank you for attending this breakout on the private sector and institutional organizations, listening to the work they're doing and plug into your local institutions and employers. Hopefully they've given you some tips and actions. So we'll see you after the break and you'll hear our last session. Thank you.